Hello, folks. Thank you to Kelly and Creative Mornings for having me. And thank you to the Himalayan Institute as well, because the Zen folks were into death way before we got to it. Seriously, though, use that free pass. Like, this is a great space. If any of you can't see my slides because of my large torso, then don't worry, they're just abstract pictures of cats and ancient scripts. So they'll go up online eventually. So this is my talk title. So a while ago, I'm 36 years old, but I've had 2 knee surgeries. So just starting right off with like positive vibes. So I've had 2 knee surgeries, and as a result, I have to go to physical therapy. And my physical therapist is a chipper, young, professional, type A personality. And she was having me do a thing where I had a band in one arm and my hand and my knee up against the wall, and the real strain is on this leg to see, stabilize your core and all that stuff. And I did pretty well. I held it for like 45 seconds, and then she said, like, pretty good. I was like, yeah, I know, I'm pretty good for 45% of the way to death. And she didn't laugh. But I am 45% of the way to death, guys. According to the US Social Security Administration, I have 45.3 more years to go, 82 total years. I don't understand how the rest of this works, but I'm gonna die. And I thought that was funny, but she didn't think it was so funny. And she said, like, you're not having a midlife crisis. I'm like, I know I'm having a 45% crisis, but whatever. I can laugh about it now, but this used to really get to me. And I think most people think of midlife crisis as like 40s, Corvette, hair implants, mostly dudes, but I mean, women too. And like, but I think a midlife crisis hits you whenever you sit down with yourself and think about it. And for 2 years, at least 2 years, I pretty much let death run as like the baseline underneath my whole life, where I was thinking about like what I've gotten done on this earth, what kind of legacy I was going to leave behind, and what would happen if I died tomorrow, which is a regular thought you have at Wegmans or whatever. But for me, I really started having like basically a midlife crisis. Like, and that statement, that you hear in a lot of motivational talks, which I try not to give or reference, is like, death makes life worth living. That like death when people try to console you about death, they tell you that death is what makes your life so purposeful, that like you gotta live, carpe diem, and you gotta, but if you think about that statement, death makes life worth living, it cuts the other way too. If you think about it, you're like, well, has my life been worth living? If death is coming tomorrow, like have I done enough? Like who tells you when you're done? Like who sits you down and says like, you've done enough. You've got it. Your legacy is set. You're all good. Like I would think about what I was going to leave behind. I would think about who would know me after I was dead. I would get jealous of people who I thought had hit that mark, where like they're going to have something on this earth forever, even when they're dead, and people are going to remember them. And I am not. When I die, people are going to realize that like I am the underachiever that I know inside my heart I am. Some of you made a face because I think you recognize that feeling. No matter what you've done, no matter what your resume looks like, your CV, you're like, I don't know, like what else is there? So I don't want to feel that way, and I don't want you to feel that way either. So I'm going to tell you one story. It's not everyone's story. I'm going to tell you my story about how I wouldn't say got over it, but like started looking at it differently. And the only good thing from spending 2 years thinking about death is this talk and this amazing playlist of 24 hours of doom metal, which a guy in Buffalo named John, and I can't find his Twitter handle, but like this is 24 hours of doom metal. And like, it's amazing. The internet has given us so much. And I stopped feeling that way about death, but I am still listening to doom metal. It is amazing. If you want to talk to me about sleep or pallbearer or InfoLore, like I am here for you after this talk. All right. So I don't have a like outside external reason to be morbid. I am doing fine. Like I I have a wife, our marriage is sound, I have a puggle and 2 cats, and like my career is good. I've spent a long time working in journalism as a newspaper reporter, then a blogger, and now I'm actually working for the failing New York Times, and it's great. Like I get to live in Buffalo in my ancient 106-year-old house that is, I just had to have the flashing repaired yesterday, but like for those of you watching this video outside Buffalo, that's like a high water mark when you own an ancient house in Buffalo. Like that's a good thing. It's wonderful. Like, so I don't have a lot of reasons to feel that way other than just kind of arriving at this naturally, like hitting a certain age, having a few knee surgeries, maybe having a bad day at work where you feel like everyone else is getting ahead of you and you're just kind of treading water. Really, the only thing I've got for like a real quick motivation line is that my dad died when I was 29 at the age of 60. He was a Vietnam veteran, and at the end of his life, he was considered 100% disabled by Agent Orange. He only lived to 60. He died like on March 10th, 2009 or 2010. Edit that out, whichever one is right. It's the day that Obama signed the Affordable Care Act into law. So I was actually like scrolling through Twitter, maybe Twitter, or scrolling through the internet, being like feeling great, like America's made it. I don't remember if you remember what that feels like, but like things are pushing forward, like things are great. And then I got a call that my dad had died, and like the last thing he said was like, "Wait a minute, this isn't right." And then he just passed away. And at the last 5 years of his life, he was in and out of hospitals, dialysis. He couldn't work, and his legacy, I mean, probably if you asked him, was his family and his work. Like his work, he was he basically ran a fish shop, which means he sold fish to restaurants and schools and stuff like that. So in quiet moments, like I would think about that and see what I said about the slides. So I would think about that. I would think about like, well, not only am I living up to like what I want to leave on this earth, do I have enough in the tank to say like, this is what I've got? Like, and is my dad cool with this? Like, did he work that hard so that I could go through college and just scroll through Twitter reading like dog memes? Like, what else? Like, what do I have to get done? It got so bad that I started thinking I wanted to write a novel. And I mean, like novels, when you write novels, you write it, people acknowledge that it was published, it goes in the Library of Congress. I mean, if you're looking for a quick fix to like substantiation of legitimacy, like the Library of Congress, like as long as the United States government exists, that the Library of Congress is going to be there, and your thing will be in there, your novel will be in there, your mediocre story about a white guy who has death problems, like you'll have that thing in there. So I went at it. Like I was like, well, I started dropping some spare projects. I was like, I need to carve out time for this. But I did what I always do, which is like, I need to research this. I need to like learn how to write a novel. So like start with like Googling how to write a novel, and then like go to the dictionary and look up the word novel, and then just kept going. And I dug into it as hard as I could, and I unexpectedly like found kind of a reason I didn't have to write the novel anymore in learning how to write the novel. I think that in learning how stories work and what makes a good story and what catches people about a good story, I think I found like what is a good way to look at my life and other people's lives. And for me, this helped me get over this fear that like I haven't done enough and I haven't left enough behind. All right, so stories are weird. This is the first page of Beowulf, the first-ish English language thing that we've like recovered from the Dark Ages. Old English, so like the first word is "whit," which means like attention or like, hey everybody, like wake up. Great way to start a novel, really. But I've read this one. I've read 2 different translations of Beowulf, and I swear, like I don't get it. Like I don't understand what makes this such a revered text. Like it's like a guy, and he beats up a monster, and then someone says his mom is coming for you because you beat up her monster son, and he goes and kills the monster son's mom underwater, and it cuts 70 years in the future, and he's old, and someone's like, this dragon is ticked that someone took his gold chalice. He's like, well, I'll go kill it then. And he kind of he knows that the dragon's going to kill him, but he's like, well, I gotta do this. So then it kills him, and then they have a giant funeral for him, and it's like which is like, I mean, that's what you want, right? But like, it's a gigantic funeral. I'm like, why? What? Like, what? That's not even a story. That's just like your drunk friend telling you like a fake story about a Scandinavian uncle. But like, and I've read a lot of stories. You guys have read a lot of stories. You've loved movies. You've loved things. But like, I mean, for some of you, you probably are good at writing stories or have tried. And like, sometimes you're like, I've read so many stories. I know what a bad movie is. I know what a good novel is. I can do this. And you sit down to write it, and it's just like, blah. Like, you just start off with a scene at breakfast. Like, it doesn't make any sense. One of the reasons that is that when you are reading a story, your brain actually goes into a mode where it starts simulating the things you're reading in the story, the character, the goals, the objects, space, time. But they studied as many people as they could reading stories, and they found that the parts of their brain that would normally process those things, like the sense of movement, actually are active while you're reading the story. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, your brain is there to help you survive. Like, your brain, what it really wants, like your reptile brain, your hindbrain, it's like, you want to live, you want to propagate, you don't want to get eaten by a saber-toothed cat. So why does your brain allow you to like sink into a story, completely lose it, and get sucked in? Well, because stories teach you lessons. Like, the only reason that evolutionary biologists can think of why your brain would allow you to do this, why people would love stories so much, is that you can learn lessons from them. Like, really simple lessons, like Healthgar ate these red berries. Everyone in the village told him not to eat these red berries. Healthgar did. Healthgar died. So like, that's a really pretty quick arc there. But like, that's a good story. Then someone's like, hey, you want to eat these red berries? You're like, you know, actually, I know about this guy named Healthgar. You don't eat those red berries. So that lets you put yourself in that position of like basic survival. There's much more higher moral stories, like your father, the king of Denmark, was murdered by your uncle. Your uncle then married your mother, and your sister's a little crazy. The guards are all drunk, and your father's a ghost, and he tells you to kill your uncle. But you're gonna take, like, what would you do? How would? That wasn't a laugh line. like stories are supposed to put you in the situation and be like, I mean, obviously pretty high-arcing situations, but like, would you sit around and monologue all day like this dude does? Or what would you do? Would you just like straight up murder your uncle because like he killed your father? I mean, yeah, some of us would. It lets you like process these things like, okay, if I was in this situation, here's what I would do. Let's say you were a very smart student and you suddenly fell in with a popular clique. You're actually like a mathlete, you're a very kind and compassionate person, but suddenly you find yourself friends with like the popular girls in school. What would you do? Would you take a lesson from Tina Fey and learn the important lessons about how we're all different and we're all striving and everyone's weird? Or would you allow Christian Slater to murder all of your friends? It could go either way, really. Two different stories with two different outcomes. Like, it's amazing. So the master tome from which I pull a lot of this and from that really inspired me to like think about this talk is a book called Wired for Story by Lisa Cron. It's literally about the brain science of writing and stories. And I am an English graduate from the University of Buffalo. I worked in journalism for nearly 10 years, and nobody ever told me how to write a story. Like, I mean, like how to say that someone died at such and such date, inverse pyramid, the newspaper stuff. Like, nobody ever sat me down and said, this is what makes a story good. This is what makes it interesting. And this book did a lot for me to teach that. And so here's the master thing. Like, if you really want the quick takeaway, if you're about to leave right now, don't, but you know, like, stories are about how what happens affects someone with a difficult goal and how they change. The best stories are that, in a nutshell. I mean, obviously, you can be experimental. You can start off with a really long passage. You can start off with a giant Ukrainian Orthodox wedding and your story about Vietnam veterans. Like, you can do a lot of things with the story, but that is ultimately what a good story gets done. If it wasn't that way, if stories were just the best things that happen. Like the most amazing things happening was the best story. If the most like huge conglomeration of like what could happen, deaths, tragic moments, sad moments, people in tight-fitting clothes, then like Michael Bay would be the Shakespeare of our time. Because he really crams a lot in there. And Transformers, The Last Night, would be the Hamlet of our time. I mean, he's going at it from the opposite way. Like, I really don't, nothing much happens to Anthony Hopkins over the course of his movies, but like, they get a lot in those stories. And as you probably know, they're not actually all that well regarded. People don't really have an attachment to them. There's some fan art that's really cool, but like, not to be a white dude with a liberal arts degree who tells you about Citizen Kane, but I'm gonna. Citizen Kane is so well regarded as a work of story, as a piece of art, because, I mean, it is essentially this. It is how, as a reporter from a newsreel organization, trying to figure out how what happened affected Charles Foster Kane, who set very high challenges for himself, and how he was affected by those things that happened to him. I mean, the whole movie is just like flashes of like running for governor, running newspapers. Like, it's, some people hate it for this reason. It just seems like just a story about a rich man, but like that is why I think at the heart of it, people love this movie so much. It is about how what happens affects a man, and it scales too. Like, it doesn't have to be about a super rich William Randolph Hearst type person. It can be about a small person in a typical situation and how what happens affects them. So back to death and Steve Jobs. I really loathe people who quote Steve Jobs too much, which for me is pretty much any quoting of Steve Jobs. This talk that he gave at Stanford that I'm referencing here, it's great. It's a TED Talk now. It's a very good speech to a group of graduates from Stanford. I think it's probably the top of its form. But Steve Jobs, at the height of his success, says to you, like, if you wake up every morning, you look in the mirror, and you're not doing the thing you want to do, like, how many more mornings are you going to do that? The only way to do great work is to find work that you love and do that every day. This is not true in Steve Jobs' own life. Like, when he was starting Apple Computer, he was trying out a whole bunch of different stuff. He was working part-time at a circuit board company. He was working the night shift at Atari, and he would take 7 months off at a time to work at the Los Altos Zen Center in LA. And if Steve Jobs had just followed what he loved to do, he would be not the maker of the phone you all have and love. He would be like the coolest teacher at the Los Altos Zen Center. Like, he would be teaching a meditation class. It would be great. It would be just as packed as this room is, but like maybe more so. But like, he would not himself have gotten to where he is. And this kind of advice of just like, oh, you just got to find the thing you love and just work at it. Like, it worked out for him by chance, but that's not how I look at things anymore. This used to drive me nuts, thinking that like I was not Steve Jobsing it hard enough. Like, I write reviews about mattresses. I do. I spent a lot of time on it, and I will tell you about the best foam mattress you can buy online for $800. But like, I'm like, oh, like, is that my legacy? Like, but is this? I don't wake up every morning and look in the mirror and say, this is who I am. Like, I'm mattresses. Like, this is me. I wake up in the morning and I look up in the mirror and I'm like, I need to shave. Like, so thinking about stories and what makes them good versus like what Steve Jobs et al. Your Instagram feed tells you is good. It changed my whole way of looking at things. I looked at stories differently. I started taking them apart a little bit and figuring out what I liked and didn't like about them on a different level. People I knew who I was jealous of, people who I thought were just the worst and getting way too far in life without any reason. Like, I thought about challenges they might have. I thought about success and legacies. I changed my whole way of thinking about stuff by just looking at it through this prism of like, what happened, how did it affect them, how did they change as a result of it. I went back to something I used to do all the time, which is read obituaries. When I was working at the Buffalo News, I applied for a full-time obituary writer job. They don't have one. Or they didn't at that time. And like, I love obituaries because the best ones, the ones that do the best work, they hit that mark. It's like, this person went through this stuff, and it's not just like, and they succeeded wildly and everyone was proud of them. No, the best obituaries tell you about how someone changed throughout their life as they were, put up against small struggles, big struggles, jumping out of a plane in World War II, or, you know, having their house marked as someone's wrong address on Google Maps or something. There was an obituary the other day, I think in the Buffalo News, about a guy named George Costanza. And the obituary was literally just like what it was like to live a life of having your name be George Costanza. It was great. It was a really good obituary. Like, that is a story I am into. I started following former athletes and celebrities instead of current athletes and celebrities, because I think it's really interesting when you see what happens to people who are long distance runners at the top of the game and they get injured, and then what do they do now? Or you're Chad Ochocinco and you used to catch amazing passes for the Cincinnati Bengals, and now you are just into playing people on FIFA and Xbox at their house. Like, you use your money to anyways. He's got a lot of weird stuff too, but like, former athletes and celebrities are way more interesting to me than current athletes and celebrities. My dad's story, like, it changed for me too. I thought about a man who signed up for the war willingly, was disillusioned by it, came back to his family business that was run by a very domineering father, how hard he had to fight to get out from under that family, which sounds, to some of you that'll sound like, how hard is that? Get a bus ticket. To some of you who have very domineering families, it's hard. Just making the choice not to work at the family business is a lot for some people. Fighting authority his whole life, never wanting to sell his business, never wanting to have to tell anybody I'm sorry, or, you know, like, kowtow to anybody, but then wanting his children to never have to do that themselves, wanting to make sure that they never had to, like, prove who they were to the world. So that's the change he went through. So my challenge to you is, either in your own life or other people's lives that you're looking at, or anyone's, think about them in this way. Like, don't think about the high marks, don't think about the Facebook feed. Ask yourself, like, how did they suffer? What adversity did they face? What unavoidable conflict did they have to go through? How did they have their worldview altered? They usually start off in one way, like my dad did, thinking like, I don't know what he was thinking, but they start off with one way and they end up another. What kind of tests were they put through that they thought they could not handle? If you've read the Harry Potter books, like, this is a big one. It's always an impossible challenge. Like, every single book is an impossible challenge, but what was the inner issue they faced as a result of facing this challenge? What external force made them have to, confront their own inner issue? And I'm going to throw a little curveball at the end here, because originally this is what this talk was about, and the Creative Mornings folks wisely kind of talked me out of it. So there could actually be a day in the near future where death is at least half as scary. Like, you could live to 200 in good health. Right now, that whole thing, like, well, who would want to live to 200 years old? Because you'd be ill, you'd be gray, you'd be in terrible condition. But I mean, technology is advancing pretty fast. Like, we could reach a point where you could live out a super long life with nanobots or fusion injections. I don't know, something. But you could live a very, very long life, and death could become something that was either like a very prolonged thing, or, I don't know, there is some day in the future where maybe we don't die. Or we only die from, train derailments and eating whole nut eggs or something. So what would that do to all these statements about death if we actually didn't die? Like, if you didn't have to live the US life expectancy, you could live a very long time. Would you say to yourself, like, this has made my life worth living? What has? Like, you could stack accomplishment on accomplishment on accomplishment, and then you'd have another 150 years to go. You'd be like, dang it. Like, you could be mayor of Buffalo for 25 years, and then another 75 years go by, and you're like, now no one remembers I was the mayor of Buffalo. So I like to think about that, because it's like, it just turns the whole thing on its head. And I think it proves to me, and what I came away from by doing this weird experiment, trying to write a novel, failing, feeling better about my life. Your story is not the plot. Your story is how the plot changed you. That's it. Thank you.